Hello, everybody, and we're going to be starting in just one moment. It seems that some of the internet services are lagging a little bit behind, but this is No Soundbites Allowed. I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm just trying to fix this lag for you right now, folks, so please bear with me for a moment, and then we're going to get started right away, okay? Obviously, I love being here with you. I love talking to you. I'm not happy about the subject that we're going to be speaking about today, because we're going to be talking about gun control. We're going to be talking about the shooting in Colorado. We're going to be talking about the facts as best as we can find them, as best as we are aware of them at this moment. And we need to have this conversation because in America right now, there is this huge divide. There are politicians who are actively using these kinds of events to separate us as a nation. And what we need to do is take away from the emotion and stop and have a conversation. Where do we want America to go? What do we actually believe about the Second Amendment? And what do we believe is the best path forward for America? And I see we already have several people who are joining us today. In the chat. Redacted has mentioned that they think this will be a good episode. I hope it will be. And that just the crisis they have been wanting to nuke the filibuster. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of questions here. So there are a lot of issues. People need to be prepared to protest and mass non-compliance. That is one of the aspects. That is one of the ways that people like to look at this and go forward. But let's take a moment to understand exactly what has happened. Let's have an understanding of what we're talking about, okay? And that is very simply that we do know for a fact that yesterday in Colorado, just outside of Boulder, there was a mass shooting. It is the 7th mass shooting this year. Let's be very clear about that. There have been 7, as far as we can tell. And there's been a lot of updates, and it's still updating as we go. So I want to be sure that as we are speaking with you today, as we are speaking at this moment, there is still breaking news coming out. We have been checking the news all the way up until just before we came on. There has been some late breaking news on who the shooter was and what they were doing. But we have a lot of manipulation going on by some politicians, by the news media, to color the way that we are looking at this. Again, I want to take a very serious look. I've talked about the Second Amendment for 12 years now. I've done speeches on it. I covered all of the bills, all the laws, and I want to be very clear with what we are looking at here. What we know for sure, a 21-year-old man walked into a grocery store, a supermarket in Colorado, and he started shooting. Police officers arrived. The first officer on the scene was killed. 9 other individuals were killed as well. This is a tragedy. It is always a tragedy when anyone dies in this nation because of violence, whether it's gun-related or anything else. But we need to take a moment to understand what's going on. Knee-jerk reactions at this moment will not help our nation. They will not help those who are grieving. It will not help anyone going forward. We want to be very clear about that. We want to be respectful for those who have lost their loved ones. At the same time, we want to look for this nation. Tony mentions, hello, Mike. Yes, I know. Facebook's been having problems, and the show started off slowly. I think because the internet overlords don't like us talking about this kind of subject in an honest, open, and fair kind of way. Now, we have to understand what's going on in this nation. There are a lot of people right now who are saying, we just have to get rid of guns. We just have to get rid of the Second Amendment. The problem are firearms. And that's not an honest answer. Not at all. Let's be very clear. As we can see, and as always, at the bottom, after the show, There will be links to every source that we're going to be going through, and there are a bunch of them, so that you will have that information and you can review it for yourself at your leisure. But nobody actually knows how many people actually own a firearm in America at this moment. It's not a straightforward answer. And that's because gun owners aren't required to register their firearms. That is a fact. The best thing that we can say is somewhere, to the best of our estimates, is somewhere between about 30 to 40% of Americans, possibly more, own a firearm. What we do know for more sure is that there is an estimate, most recently by the Small Arms Survey of 2018, that estimated that there were, in 2017, approximately 393 million firearms in the United States, which works out to about 1.5 firearms per person in the United States. That's the rough estimate. We know from various studies, from surveys, people have estimated that there could be varying levels of gun ownership in populations across the nation. And even some have estimated as low as 10% in New York State, as high as 61% in Alaska. But no one knows for sure. And if you look at things like from CBS in 2020, they were mentioning that gun ownership by the states from lowest to highest. And they made that statement with some very negative imagery, some very negative wording to try and discourage people. And that's a fact. A lot of the media wants to discourage you from being able to own a firearm. Many politicians want you to be discouraged from owning a firearm. The question I want to ask and answer today, or at least, very least, ask is that going to make you safer? If you can't own a firearm, will you be safer? Is that going to help you? Is that going to stop these mass shootings? And to the best of my knowledge, the answer in all of my research over the last 12 years, at least, has been no. That won't make you safer. It won't stop them. That's because these individuals have a criminal intent and they want to cause harm. And they will find ways to do it, whether that's through illegal firearms or using knives, bricks, baseball bats, whatever it is. Many of these people are mentally deranged. And that is another motivating factor. But that's not everything, including, and I want to be very clear, 538.com did a study on all mass shootings over the last 30 years. They found that there are 38 different categories that fall into what we see as mass shootings. There is no silver bullet. Anyone who's trying to tell you it's just as simple as getting rid of the firearms is lying to you. They have an agenda. That's the reality. And we need to keep that in our mind because there is no one single answer. Let me get to some of the comments here. Redacted mentioned that I have read there have been 7 mass shootings this year so far, but the media has only covered the last 2. That is correct. To further the race baiting divide and white nationalist narrative, that's debatable, but more true than not. And Christina mentions that, and how many of them know basic firearm safety? Not enough. That is also very true. Vic mentions that COVID lockdowns are not for the health and safety of Americans. They're meant to keep patriots from meeting and protesting against the tyrannical actions of a well-established rogue government. That's part of the problem too. Again, we have several at odds things going on right now. We have a news media and politicians who happen to control our Congress, our Senate, and our presidency that do not like firearms, do not want you to have firearms. These are the very same people who do have firearms, that do have armed guards protecting them, that do have, right now in DC, the military are protecting them and separating them from the people. So there is a big disconnect here. They want to have the protections that they don't want you to have. The news media don't like this Second Amendment, this freedom that most people in the world don't have. And most people in the world don't understand because they've never had that ability. I mean, if we're talking about our good friends in the United Kingdom, it was back in the 1500s, I believe it was 1582, that they lost the right to have a firearm. And yes, for people who are not aware, firearms were around in the 1500s. And they lost their right to a firearm in the 1500s. They've never known the freedom that Americans have to be able to bear arms. It is a fundamental right that is shall not be infringed. It is a fundamental, absolute right, just like our First Amendment rights. But we have to ask the question, even though the media has a bias, and it is a very clear bias, and I can show you that bias in a moment, even though we have politicians who have a bias and use these kinds of events to poison the minds of people, to instill fear, to try and enact more power, is that fair? Is that in the best interest of the public? I mean, that's the argument that can be made. Yes, it may infringe on our rights. Yes, it may infringe on our freedoms, but is it going to make us safer? And isn't that worthwhile to stop another 21-year-old out of Colorado, who's in Colorado, stopping them from being able to cause this kind of havoc, this kind of hell on earth? And I would tell you the answer is no. Now, I see Redacted mentioned loss of Christian values and mental health are the main culprits in his belief or her belief. I'm not sure if Redacted is male or female. Tony Z mentions it's definitely plausible. And Larry, thank you, Larry, for joining us. And I want to have a fair and balanced conversation about this because we have to have a clear, fair balance about this. If it makes sense, if we can show that people will be safer by restricting our Second Amendment rights more, there is a fair argument there. But that's not a knee-jerk reaction, it's a question. And the answer to that question, as far as I've seen, is no, but let's actually look at some of the evidence. What do we know? We know that a lot of the times the media are pulling out information and telling us things that aren't exactly true. As an example, they're using, we've seen CBS, as I was just showing you, is trying to tell Americans that there aren't that many people, only about 30% of American adults that own a firearm. They get their data from a report by the Rand Corporation where they created their own data. Now, they did use information on suicides, hunting licenses, but they also used information from subscriptions to Guns and Ammo magazine. And, of course, background checks. But ownership of a magazine and background checks don't mean you own a firearm. They don't mean that you're going to own a firearm. That's their projection. That's not solid data. That's an assumption. But the news media spins this in many cases towards their advantage to say, well, no, there are fewer people who own a firearm than you think. You're more isolated. This is a smaller group, easier to control. They have less power in our government and in our lives. I don't believe that's accurate. Now, when you're basing it on magazine sales, that's a very iffy and sketchy way to come up with numbers. And then we have the news media, like, and this is from CBS again from 2020, when they're telling us things like, they're trying to tell us how many people per state. What are the states that have the most people with firearms? And they couple that with messages about suspected gang members. They talk about shootings at various locations, outbreaks of 2020. They're making this as negative as possible. They're showing you images of illegal gun ownership and illegal guns. That's not the way to have a fair and honest conversation. Whether you're for or against the Second Amendment, that's not fair. That's prejudicial. What we need to understand is, realistically, we do know that when people are asked, they in general have been saying pretty consistently now since the 2007 that about 44% of our nation, just under about half, own firearms. That is a reality. That means that somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 million people own firearms right now. Roughly, 1 out of 2 people that you meet walking down the street own a firearm. Very nearly 1 out of 2. Every other neighbor that you see has a firearm. Now, let's think about this. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Quite honestly, it depends on your neighbors, I imagine. But what we can tell is that because 1 out of 2 people in America, roughly, own a firearm, you're not dead. Most people are perfectly fine. Some 99% of legal gun owners or people who possess a firearm are perfectly safe and pose no harm to anyone. We know from the CDC that roughly only about 14,000 homicides happen with a firearm each year. And we know that according to Pew Research, looking at their data, and this is from, and I want to be a little clear, in 2019, so we're not talking long ago, we can see that in average, there's been a pretty consistent range of gun-related deaths in the United States. It's roughly about 13%. If we're going from 1979 until 2017, the last time they had data on this, it averages out to about 13%. There are peaks, there are valleys, and we are below the 1990s overall, but it's about 13%. This is a constant in our nation. And that's something that needs to be understood. There is, just like crime is roughly constant, and no matter how many laws you put out there, there are still people who want to commit crimes. Whether you say that the quality of life in the United States is better than most places in the world, and people still commit crimes. Our poor are considered rich in 80% of the world, and yet there's still crime. Some people just do bad things. Does that mean we should punish everyone else? Not necessarily. But our media likes to play certain games about this information. They try and make it sound like there is an epidemic going on right now, that this is rampant. Oh my God, there's 7 mass shootings. Let's really look at some of this data. Because I want you to understand, last year, 5 million Americans became first-time gun owners because of because of the COVID crisis. And there are fears that the police could not be there to protect themselves. And I'm going to come to the comments again in a second. So shouldn't we, since 5 million more people became gun owners, that means what, 165 million people, or just those 5 million? Isn't that mean that there should be 5 million shootings, that 5 million people should be dead? Obviously not. So the hyper fear that's being put into people's minds isn't appropriate. That's not to take away from the tragedies that we see, but it's also to put it into perspective. Many people have gotten firearms, especially in the last year. That doesn't mean your risk has gone up. In fact, it may mean that your risk has gone down. But that's not what the news media wants to tell you. They want to tell you about, and I'm going to come to the comments in a second, but I want to be clear about something. And again, it's important that we understand the basics of what's going on before we start talking about, and what do we do? Because there's a lot of politicians rushing out there saying, we have to do something right now. Do something, do something, do something. Don't think, just act. And when people do that, they tend to make the wrong decision because they haven't taken into account what's really going on and how do you really fix it. And let's understand the scope of this. We're being told about the 7 mass shootings this year. 567 people have been shot in Chicago this year. That's 139 more people at this time as of March 15th than in 2020. We can see that in Chicago, 107 people have been killed this year in homicides, mostly gun related, and that's 13 more than in 2020. You're not hearing about that in the news. This weekend that just passed, 25 people were shot in Chicago. You didn't hear a headline about that. Going to Baltimore as another example, there have been, so far in the month of February, 17 murders and 45 non-fatal shootings. For the year, there have been 44 murders, which is down 6 from last year, and 94 shootings versus last year at this same time. But you're not hearing about that in the news. Why? Possibly because these states are Democratic states, possibly because these states have Democratic leaders and have for over half a century, possibly because these states and these cities have every single gun control law that has been suggested or offered in the last 30 years, and that is not protecting the public. It hasn't made people safer. It has made the government stronger, larger, and more powerful, but it didn't make people safer. And we have to understand that. And it also means that making it harder to have a firearm doesn't equal safety. Criminals still behave criminally. The mentally deranged are still deranged. Let me get to some of the comments here. So, Redacted had mentioned we allowed too much infringement already. How do we stop it and reverse it? Is there a way without violence? Is there a way when our institutions have been corrupted? Tony's mentioning that the report is based mostly on speculation. Yes, I did mention that. After sales last year and this year, Redacted mentions, I suspect that the number has gone up to close to 50%, very likely, in terms of gun ownership in the United States. Hot Chicks is mentioning that you want to compare the number of deaths to automobiles. That is another very interesting statement. Again, automobiles, which are not a right, they are a privilege. You don't need a car to live, but you may need a firearm to protect yourself. And how many people die from those? 50,000 a year? So legislating with emotion is terrible. Again, from Redacted. Tony mentions that sometimes most major one-off crimes are a matter of pure necessity, mostly done by, all accounts, normal people. Dow mentions that the police are worried about being outgunned by law-abiding citizenry. I would think that trained in self-defense, law-abiding firearm owners would be welcome, so police can focus on criminals, which we refer to the Good Samaritan. Something like what we saw recently in Missouri at the American Legion shooting, which had an entire event. 100 people were present, a shooter was present, 2 people were injured, and the entire event was ended before the police even got there. And while the media didn't make that a big deal, the fact is other shooters were present, other Good Samaritans were there to protect those people in the public. And that makes a big difference. In fact, if we look at the data over the years, we have seen that when the largest number of people that are injured in a mass shooting tend to happen within the first 2 minutes. And if there is a member of law enforcement or someone with a firearm to confront that individual, then it normally reduces the number of people who could be injured potentially by 50%. This is data that came out of the report from the Parkland shooting and studies done by the commission from Parkland about how to improve safety at our schools from mass shooters. So there's a lot of information here. And again, we're not always getting the whole story, and the media is being very, very selective in the information they want to provide to us. We're also seeing a lot of misinformation out there. such as if you go, and a lot of people do, to Wikipedia and you look at the 2021 total U.S. mass shootings, well, the way they're counting it, there's been 107 mass shootings so far in the United States, with 122 people killed, which the news media itself, the major news media, do not agree with. They're saying there's 7 mass shootings that have happened. You look at what's going on in the internet, they're telling you an entirely different number. By the way, that number is roughly just slightly higher than what we saw in 2020. And that number, looking at 2019, isn't even provided. The news media, the internet, is very selective. I bring these things up so that we understand we have to pay attention to serious details. We need to understand what's really happening here. Because we've seen, in my lifetime, 50 years, 5 decades, we've seen mass shootings every year, to some degree, to some amount. And we've seen crimes with and without firearms. That doesn't mean that we need to knee-jerk remove people's rights and abilities. And we've had a lot of problems. I mean, we hear this all the time. You go to Twitter, you see someone like David Levitt, who is an award-winning multimedia journalist, who came out 4 hours ago and said, it's an AR-15. It's always an AR-15. AR-15s, the assault rifles, which they're not. They're a semi-automatic rifle. They're no different than hunting rifles people use every day. And again, there are something like 160 million people with firearms right now. 5 million more people right now than last year at the same time. That doesn't mean you're going to be any more in danger or any less in danger. In fact, let's look at some of the other shootings that happened this year. None of them had AR-15s. But that's why you're hearing about this story right now. Again, let's be clear. The media has an agenda. They want to tell you a certain story. Take a look at what you heard about the shooting in Colorado today. If you go back and look at the stories as they were coming out, looking at the early news from 9 a.m. today from USA Today, you'll not see a single person mention any firearm. The police had not reported that. There was no confirmation on what kind of firearm was used. They were also very clear in not mentioning the name of the suspect, even though he had been taken into custody by police. Nor was his age mentioned. Let me ask you a simple question. How long did it take for the news media to tell you the name, the age, and the type of firearms used in the shooting last week in Atlanta? How quickly was that attributed to hate as a hate crime? It was immediate, even though the suspect themselves denied that this was a crime of hate. It was a crime based on their sexual addiction, and that they had targeted facilitators of their sexual addiction, which is still a crime, no doubt. But the media disconnects from what's actually out there. And in fact, if we looked at this, and I did, and as I said, so that was the news on USA Today. You went to the AP News 6 minutes ago, and they won't tell you what is the name of the man who actually committed this crime. It's not in the story. They tell you he's a 21-year-old man and refuse to mention anything else about it. If you go, you have to wait and look to NBC News, which actually came out before the AP story. And NBC News finally mentioned that the man's name is Ahmad Aliza, and he's 21. And that's going to be the only time I'm going to mention this man's name, because he doesn't deserve any fame or attention. But we see this, and even when you're looking on Twitter, they'll tell you, oh, he's 21-year-old, it's a male. They didn't tell you the firearm. They didn't tell you the person's name. The media is manipulating the story because they have an agenda. The agenda is to make you afraid, and to make you very afraid of very specific people in a very specific way. Because if he was white, they'd have told you his name. They'd have told you his color, as well as his age. If they were sure of the firearm that he was using, they would have told you that as well. But as we can tell from the BBC News, when they were talking about this, they mentioned that they're not even sure if it is, and if it is, it still has not been confirmed of what kind of firearms being used. They mentioned that a police source told CNN that it was an AR-15 style rifle, which means a semi-automatic gun that was used in this shooting. Which means we don't know if this was or was not an AR-15 at this moment. So, and I bring that up because does an AR-15, is that the only firearm that's in existence right now? Is that the only semi-automatic rifle? Because if you look at the laws that are being made, they seem to target that. If you listen to the news media, they target that. And they keep saying, well, it's an AR-15 or it's an AR-15 style. What, there is no such thing as another semi-automatic firearm? Is that the only firearm that's made in America? Are most shootings done with rifles? In fact, no. Only about 2% of all shootings, all criminal shootings, are done, or mass shootings, excuse me. Only about 2% of all mass shootings per year are done with an actual semi-automatic rifle. Most are done with handguns, and that's about 46%, with roughly 12 to 17% are done with shotguns. So again, our point here today is to have an honest conversation about firearms so that we can have an honest conversation about gun ownership and gun control. If we don't have this honest conversation, then we're going to make the wrong decision. And there are people who are betting on that. There's a reason why the news media is very specific about the type of stories they're going to tell you, when they tell you them, and the information that they're going to put out there, even when it's wrong, because CNN gets it wrong a lot. The New York Times gets it wrong a lot. Washington Post, didn't they just have to put a retraction out and a correction to their story for lying to the American people 2 months ago? And now here we are, they're telling us it's an AR-15. We don't know that. That's not what the police have said yet. So looking at some of the comments again, those shootings ruined the narrative. Gun violence is a plague of the urban sprawl and is fairly isolated in its incidents, according to Redacted. Redacted goes on to say, if the government wanted to save lives, they would be talking about heart disease, obesity, and our lifestyles. Tony mentions it's not reported or given enough oxygen because it goes against the swamp narrative, some of the other stories, some of the other information that's out there. Honestly, when we're looking at this information, we understand. So it's not just white males. It's not just hate crimes. It's not just crimes against someone's sexual preference. It's not just automatic firearms, semi-automatic firearms. And no, it's absolutely not automatic firearms, because those are already banned since 1939, unless you have a special license for it, which about 5,000 people in America do. That's it. It's not machine guns. This isn't a movie, and the firearms don't fire endless bullets. We have to take that insanity, that hyper reaction, and take it away so that we can appreciate what we can do to actually make people safer. And I'm giving you the data so that you can make that logical and reasoned conclusion. But to say, well, it's just white men, well, that's racist, because it's not just white men. And it's not just people of color. That's racist. It's not true. It's not a fact. To say that it's just semi-automatic rifles, That's not true. And it's highly deceptive. And it absolutely is incorrect. And if you're making decisions based on in these incorrect pieces of data, you're going to not fix the problem. And that has been the problem for the last 50 years in America. We are looking at the wrong thing. They keep telling you it's the gun, it's the gun, it's the gun. No, it's not. It's the people who are doing this. That's the one thing that's absolutely common every single time. It's people who have made a choice, who have decided that another human being's life is not important. And if we can resolve why they're coming to that conclusion and to stop that, we can save lives. But to tell me it's just because they use a firearm, what about people who use cars and trucks, box cutters, planes? People who want to harm someone find a way. Let's find a reason why they want to harm other people. Let's solve that problem first. Let's get the people who have the mental issues medication. That seems to be a lot more effective to me. That will protect people. But just simply saying, well, we're just going to take away the firearms, like that's ever stopped a criminal ever. The only person that punishes is law-abiding citizens. And again, 99% of citizens do not cause a problem. There are 165 million people, conservatively, that own firearms right now. 1 out of 2 people that you meet has a firearm. So, I'm trying to take the temperature down on this because I see the rhetoric. It's out there. Like I said, you're seeing people who are commenting on Twitter and they're losing their minds. And they're making all of these allegations, kind of like David Levitt did. And we're seeing the comments from Volatile Mermaid, individuals like Mr. Newberger. We're seeing all of these comments. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was showing this to you. So again, David Levitt, Volatile Mermaid. We're seeing comments from Robin, so many people. And they're losing their minds because they're wrapped up in this emotion. And they're making it based on information that isn't accurate. And that means they're not going to help anyone. It's not going to make you better off. And the news media isn't helping because they're promoting this false narrative. It's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. If you're giving people the wrong information, they're going to make the wrong calculation. And if we believe that, well, guess what? We're never going to get another man to the moon. You're always going to have a paycheck that's short money. It's that simple sometimes, folks. Tony mentions that we don't have a gun problem, we have a people problem. And I think that is absolutely the core of it. We have thousands of people who die because of stabbings. We have we got thousands of people who died because of cars. Drug overdoses just hit 81,000 in 2020. They still haven't released the official numbers on how much suicides have gone up in just the last year. We have problems right now. And to say that, well, it's all because of guns, because of mass shootings. Well, what about the mass shootings and all the shootings that happened because of the George Floyd riots? Do they count? Are they the same thing? Do they fall into the same category? Should we be afraid and terrified of everybody who's attached to BLM because some of their members have committed crimes, heinous crimes, murders? The answer from the news media is no. But gun owners are bad people. Why? I mean, it's a serious question. It's a very serious question. And we need to answer that question. Why is it so important for people like Senator Kirsten Gillibrand to come out and say, well, we have to take away your Second Amendment rights, the very thing that allows us to be able to have the First Amendment right? And when I say why I'm having this conversation, I want you to be very clear in understanding this. In every nation that we have seen across the world, when people have been disarmed and they have had their ability to protect themselves taken away, in each and every one of those cases, we watch people being killed by their governments. The most recent example I can point to that you can check yourself, because it's been reported by the New York Times, Venezuela took away the rights of individuals to be able to own firearms because it had a more liberal use of firearms. The public could own a firearm. They took away that right. And then 2 years later, they killed 5,200 of their own people because the government were the only ones who had the firearms left. That's a story we hear over and over again in every country around the world once the public is disarmed. And if the government can come out and kill anyone they want to, and you don't have the ability to defend yourself, do you think you're really going to have the ability to speak freely? Do you think it's a free nation with free elections at that point? And this is an important thing to understand. So this is why this is important. Because if we lose the right to the Second Amendment, we lose the right to free speech. And that means that the government has total control over us and our lives. And every time we've seen that happen in that order, the guns are gone, you lose your free speech, the government is the power. The very next thing that happens every time in history is, and the people die. So it's a very important issue. It's a massively important issue. And we have to be very careful about how we do this. Because if we don't, we have seen the road and where it leads if we get this wrong. At the same time, we have to be very aware there is a problem. And we need to fix that problem. I'm not telling you I have the perfect answer. I'm telling you that I believe the perfect answer is not abolish the Second Amendment, like we've seen former Justice Stevens suggest, and many of the radical members of the left, people like the fake Hispanic in Texas who is running for president shortly, Beto O'Rourke. You know, the Irishman who thinks he's actually Hispanic. Beto, who says, I want to take your AK-47s, your AR-15s. His answer isn't one to make you more safe. It's to make the government more powerful. By the way, folks, I am looking at some of the comments. If you think I'm wrong, please tell me why. If you think that removing the Second Amendment is the answer, please tell me why. If you think the data I am showing you is incorrect or incomplete, please tell me why. Because this is how we get to the best answer we can. And I'm not trying to mislead anyone. I am trying to give you information. I have 12 years of data, and we can't share that in just one conversation. But if I'm missing something critical, please bring it up. Because we need to have a rational discussion. And if we don't have a rational discussion, we will make the mistake. And whether that's to having too many firearms or not enough firearms, having less freedom or too much freedom, if such a thing can exist, then I want to be able to make sure we're not going to the extremes, that we're doing the best thing we can for the public. So Dal mentions that 1 out of 2 people in the United States are gun owners, as I've mentioned. Then who are the constituents that want all this gun control? The majority want representatives to pass legislation that criminalizes them. It makes no sense. Well, let's actually look at this. I'm glad you brought that up. Because one of the things we have to consider when we're looking at this. So let's throw out the idea that we're going to abolish the Second Amendment. That historically is absolutely the worst answer. No matter how bad it is right now, no matter how much fear you may have because of, and if you only that much fear, let's throw out the Second Amendment, because if you say throw out the Second Amendment, that's an even worse scenario. So let's throw that out. But let's look at what is the table going to be the answer. We've covered covered this before on this channel. So let's have that honest discussion. Would this bill, H.R. 127, have saved the people in Atlanta from that shooting, or today from Colorado? Would they be safer? And I'm showing you the bill so that you can look this up for yourself and that you can double check what I'm about to say. Because the answer is no, it will not. H.R. 127 mandates that you would have to tell the government where your firearm is. That doesn't stop anyone from using it, especially a criminal who isn't going to tell the government that they have a firearm in the first place. You have to register your firearms. Actually, you have to register with the government to get a firearm. Criminals don't register firearms. They don't care. They use illegal guns. They use them illegally. Registering doesn't make them safer. H.R. 127 by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee out of Texas, she says that you have to pay an insurance for owning a firearm. You pay $800 minimally, $800 for the right of owning a firearm. Would that stop the Atlanta shooter? The answer is no. Would that stop the shooter in Colorado? The answer is no. It would just make people poor, and it would make it very difficult for people who are people of color, who are poor, to be able to afford to own a firearm and their Second Amendment rights. Of using economics to punish you and prevent you from being able to have your right. It's not actually protecting you. It doesn't actually help you. It just punishes you for having a privilege, a right. It isn't going to make you safer. I'm being honest, I'm being fair. This is what the bill says. And they're telling you this is going to protect you. Read the bill. I have. It's not going to stop someone who has a criminal intent. It's not going to stop someone who has mental illness. Paying insurance to own a firearm isn't stopping someone from the way they use that firearm, especially if they have criminal intent. Knowing where that firearm is in their home doesn't stop them from using that firearm inside or outside of that home. H.R. 127 by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, which is being promoted right now because of the shootings in Atlanta and in Colorado, doesn't make you safer. Will not help a single person in America. It will help the government. It will make the government more powerful. It will allow the government to take away your firearm, but it doesn't help you. So let's look at another bill, because again, this is why we went through this, to understand, to get some clear understandings that there are more than 393 million guns in America, more guns than there are people. If the guns were inherently dangerous by themselves, we'd already be dead. So that's not a factor. And we already know 1 out of 2 people, roughly, rounding up slightly, depending on the estimate, 1 out of 2 people in America already own a firearm. And that's not killing everybody. So that's not the problem. So the Second Amendment in and of itself isn't the problem. What other solutions are we being given by our elected leaders? Sheila Jackson Lee obviously doesn't know what she's talking about. That's useless. How about H.R. 8, background checks? Let's get more background checks. Again, that only works if you're a legal gun owner and you're telling the government everything. That's it. If you lie on your taxes, you'll probably lie about how many guns you own. If you're a criminal and you don't file taxes and you break the law for a living because you commit harm against other people, do you think they're going to register their firearms? Do you think they're going to do a background check? And by the way, background checks are only as good as the people who do them. We have seen consistently over and over again in the last decade I think there's at least 7 cases of mass shooting. Didn't background don't work. Again, you can check my background. That doesn't mean I can't use a firearm in any kind of way, nor is a criminal going to do it in the first place. Again, it doesn't make you safer. It's not going to help you. It's not going to stop the guy in Atlanta. It doesn't stop the guy in Colorado, to the best of our knowledge, unless more information shows up. That's what I know of right now. I'm trying to be honest with you folks. And I'm going to get to the comments again in a second. I just want to let's look at a third option, which is the red flag law, a national red flag law, which I am totally against. But I'm trying to be fair here. I'm trying to give you an honest, impassionate understanding of what we're looking at. And what these politicians are promoting to you, will it make you safer? That's the only thing I'm trying to understand right now. Will an extreme risk protection order prevent you from being harmed? No. Because again, that's only assuming that someone knows that you have a firearm and you intend to do something bad. Now in Columbine, parents knew what was going on. They knew their kids had a problem. They knew that they had firearms and were building bombs, and they didn't pay attention to their kids. So you have to have someone who's aware and willing to turn in that person, which isn't always the case. We've seen that over and over again. In addition to that, that assumes that people know you have the firearm. What if you don't tell them? What if you're a criminal and you're hiding it? The police don't know you have it. They can't come and take it. Does this prevent people from doing bad things? So you're a perfectly normal person, and we've seen that in mass shootings. We've seen that in all kinds of events. Let's say that you're just how many times have we seen someone say, we have no idea why this person did this. They don't have a criminal history. They didn't show any signs. Neighbors saying that, I thought he was a regular person. The Parkland shooter is an example, and others. Oh, they were just normal people. I would never have expected that. Extreme risk protection orders, red flags, would not protect you. And again, it looks like we're seeing a lot of problems with, because I'm being honest with you. The social media doesn't want you to see this. They don't want you to have this conversation. I'm being honest. I'm giving you all the data I can. And you know what? Not one of the laws I've mentioned, nor is removing the Second Amendment, an answer to the problem that we see in Chicago. 567 people have been shot this year. Almost all those guns are illegal, gang-related, drug-related. All of these laws, they have the red flag. They have different types of firearms that you can have. They have the most severe penalty. 39 more people dead, shot this year than last year. They have more homicides this year than last year. And they have every single gun control claim, every law. Ask yourself, why are we doing this? We're running down the wrong road. I want to stop the next person who is like the Atlanta shooter, who is like the shooter in Colorado. Not because of the color of their skin, because they're conservative or liberal, or no, those aren't the reasons. I don't care about that. I want to stop them because they're criminals doing a crime and being violent. So let's find the most effective way to do that. It's not getting rid of guns. It's not punishing legal gun owners. It's certainly not HR 127 and having to buy insurance for the gun. It's certainly not having to tell the government where you put your guns in your house. It's certainly not red flag laws. None of those things have worked. So what is it? That's the conversation we need to have. That's the thing. And I'm asking you, because those things won't work. I know there's a bunch of people who are watching this right now, Republicans and Democrats, libertarians as well, who are saying, Mike, I just don't like that answer. Okay, but doesn't mean I'm wrong. It doesn't mean the analysis is incorrect. But maybe we should be looking for a better answer, a different answer, not simply, let's give the government more power. Let me go to some of the comments. So, and I know the social media just hates me. Looks like they dropped me on, I'm talking to people and it looks like they just dropped every single, wow, did I just get banned from YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and D Live all at the same time? Did I just get banned from the entire internet? Wow. Because it looks like I've just been banned from all the internet news media for talking about gun control and telling people the truth, telling them the honest truth, because I'm still going. I'm still going to have this conversation. And if the news media has stopped me, that's all right. I will find another way to get this out to you. But it certainly looks like, because I'm streaming and I have more than enough signal strength, and it looks like they just cut off everybody. Or maybe I'm still streaming and they just silenced everyone from being able to speak to me, which is terrifying. Now, I want to go back to some of the comments that have said, and I left off with Dow mentioning that none of this makes sense. And Redacted mentions the victims' bodies were not cold before they kicked up the rhetoric to take away people's firearms. Christina mentions that you're on point and that you should draw your own conclusion. HR 127 stalled. Cube madman with a firearm. It is interesting that the news media is most likely to tell you about a mass shooting after they have a set love and answer the over. Every time we see out that says from the American people, we're going to restrict their uninfringible, undeniable, inalienable rights. The more that they aren't able to take away those freedoms, the more that we see this fear and this terror that is very specific and very targeted, that is meant to try and promote their issues. It's very political. And again, the more political you are, the less you're helping people. There is a better answer out there. I'm not saying I have the perfect answer, but every bit of evidence I can see, there are 22,000 gun laws in the United States, and they have existed, the majority of them, well over 20,000 of them, for the last 70 years. And it hasn't stopped the problem, which means we need a new answer. Tony mentions I am still live. And it seems that YouTube at some point dropped me off. YouTube's dropped me 3 times so far. You know what? Before I got on today, folks, I just updated my computer system. I just increased my internet speed to well over 20 mega, I'm at 40 megapixels, mega Mbps. I'm at like 40. Upgraded it just for this program. It's not my computer. If we're running into troubles right now, it's directly because this internet overlords don't want you to hear a conversation. A conversation that is not using, I'm not trying to be extremist. I am not being emotional. I am not trying to be reactionary. I am not using any kind of rhetoric. I'm looking at facts and details and making a discussion. And they don't seem to like it because it doesn't match the fear that is being put out. And that fear isn't helping you. And I am more than happy for someone. I would love to listen to any single politician, Sheila Jackson Lee, Kirsten Gillibrand, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, AOC. Where is Beto O'Rourke? Please tell me how I am wrong about these laws. Please explain to me how picking on law-abiding citizens is going to stop criminals and the mentally deranged. Please explain that to me. Tell me how taking away firearms from legal gun owners, 165 million of them, is going to make anyone safer from the tens of thousands of criminals that don't follow the law and don't care. Let's throw out the fact that it's 165 million. You can't take away 165 million people's firearms. You can't go door to door and take things from people unless you want to have a civil war. But let's be realistic here. Assuming that you could, that's not stopping even one criminal. That's not stopping even one mentally deranged person. It means it's not making you safer. You need a different answer. Does that not make sense? And if that makes sense, then we need to start having that conversation and not this media-filled, news media promoted rhetoric that is meant to scare people into saying, oh, please, Mr. Politician, save me. Do something. Do anything. And I'm willing to give away my freedoms and my rights no matter what. So, people are mentioning that I should have a ham radio so I could have this conversation. You know what? I want people to see that the internet overlords are stopping this conversation because I believe them being very reasonable. And this is open to every single one of those people who think guns are the problem. They can call into the show, 607-242-1582. They can leave a comment live. I'll listen to their argument. I'll listen to their conversation. I've asked for it 4 or 5 times now in this show. Where is it? They're not. Because I'm making a reasonable, logical case. And I'm asking for us to work together to get a reasonable, logical answer. Because the answer that they're giving us is very emotional and very ineffective. It doesn't actually do anything like we are promised. And I can say that as a fact. Red flag laws have not stopped any of the things that red flag laws are promised to stop. They haven't stopped shootings. They haven't stopped homicides. They haven't stopped mass shootings. They haven't lowered suicides. I've looked at all the data since 1999. I've talked to Connecticut. I've talked to Indiana. I've talked to New York State. There's no proof it has ever helped anyone at any time. Ever. There is no proof that it even lowers suicide rates. Studies have been done. It doesn't work. And if you're wondering, the studies have been done by University of Indiana and Duke University. Please look them up. There's only 2 studies that have been done since 1999. I've read them both. Replaxols don't work. Look at the crime statistics for Connecticut, for Illinois, for California, for New York State, the highest states with gun control and gun and confiscation regulations. They have the same, if not the highest levels of gun crimes in the nation, as well as violent crimes in the nation without a firearm. The problem isn't the gun, it's the criminal. What is happening in that environment in California, in New York, in Illinois, in Maryland, in Louisiana, in Connecticut, that is causing this to happen? I mean, seriously, folks, we have to look at that. So let me come back to the comments. Tony Z, but you have to know that you're looking for, talking about ham radios. Yeah, the ham radios are an answer. But I can tell you, if the news media, if they are willing to go out and try and stop this conversation, they're willing to try and stop all conversations. Because quite honestly, what have I said that's outrageous? What have I said that's bad, negative, sensational, harmful? Why are they trying to suppress what I am saying right now? Why are they denying my First Amendment right? As people are telling me that they're doing because they've been dropping this story. You have to ask that question. Why is it that the internet overlords and the news media don't want to have this conversation? Especially at the same time that they are hyping up the news and dividing this nation and terrifying people and saying, you've got to count on the government. That's the only answer. And the government has never got it right. They haven't been the answer yet. The same thing they're saying today, get rid of the guns, is the same thing they've been saying since the 1970s. Think about that for a second, folks. The government has been saying since the 1970s that the answer is take away the guns. And they have been trying to take away guns since the 1970s at the least. And that hasn't stopped any of the problems. We have installed thousands of laws, literally, with different variations on you can't have a gun. Legal gun owners can't own a gun. They've been doing this. It's not new. They just have different variations and different reasons why they can take the firearm away from you. And it hasn't made anyone safer. So why do we think this latest round and the next round that's going to be coming up literally later today, if not in tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week, saying that we have to get rid of guns? Why is that going to be any different than anything we have seen up to this moment? And why do they need to censor my voice and break up the story and take and shut me down as we're doing this live stream? Why are they going to do that if they have the right answer? It should be a very simple thing for them to say, okay, here's the proof, Mike. Here's the proof. We got rid of the guns and the crime went away. And if you notice, you have never heard Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. You've never heard AOC. You've never heard Kirsten Gillibrand, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, CNBC, MSNBC, ABC. You have not heard the news media, New York Times, Washington Post. You have never seen them put out the news and say, and here's the proof where this law actually stopped the crime or stopped the crazy, the mentally disabled individuals. You have never seen that because it doesn't happen. So why do you think it's going to happen this time. Anfield mentions that censorship is out of control. I never thought it would happen in my lifetime. It's been coming, and it's been here before, but it's worse now. It's more obvious now. And Christina mentions that I've only said good things. That's been my only intention, to have an honest and very direct and clear conversation with the public, not to be emotional. This isn't about the fact that I support the Second Amendment. I do. But I'm also looking at this and saying, and here's the best things they are offering us. H.R. 127, H.R. 8, S. 292. By the way, S. 292 is by Marco Rubio. It is a Republican bill. I still don't agree with it. I still say red flag laws are bad. So it's not a Democrat-only thing. Even Republicans who believe in removing the Second Amendment or restricting it aren't helping you. They're not doing you any favors. The faster we can understand that, the faster we can get to the reality of what the solution is. You know, more mental health issues. I think that's one of the biggest problems right there. I think it's one of the best answers we can have. Let's improve our mental health services across this nation. Why is it that none of these politicians that are telling you you can't have a gun aren't saying at the same time, hey, let's get better mental health? Instead of paying the country of Jordan $300 million so that they can run their government, which they did in December, part of the $1.9 trillion we spent in December of 2020, instead of paying them that money, why don't we use that $300 million to improve the mental health services in our nation, to try and stop people who are mentally deranged and cause other people physical harm with and or without a firearm? Good morning, Janice. It's very good to see you. Doesn't that make sense? Isn't that worthwhile? How about instead of spending $10 million to teach the Pakistani people gender issues, which we did in December 2020, rather than doing that, how about we spend that money on mental health to lower the risk of someone who is deranged trying to kill people with or without a firearm? Does that make sense? Isn't that worthwhile? Why isn't there a politician who's saying that right now? Why is the news media telling you there is only one answer, and that's to give more power to the government? Which we have historically seen, again, I say it, we've historically seen it everywhere in the world where that has happened. The people are more oppressed, they are less free, and usually the government is killing them more often. You think you know what? If you think my example talking about Venezuela is a bad example, okay, how about China? The Uyghurs in China, who are genocidally being killed by the Chinese government right now. I know Joe Biden doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to take on China right now, and he's more upset with Syria than anything else, or he wants to pick a fight with Russia and Vladimir Putin, but he doesn't really want to, and his biggest challenge are a bunch of stairs. I get it, but yet again, let's look at China. Massive superpower. They have a huge military. They have a larger standing army than the United States. And they use that power where the people don't get to have firearms. They don't have a Second Amendment right. They don't have a First Amendment right. And China selectively goes out and kills people. The Uyghurs is one example. Look at Taiwan and what they do to the people of Taiwan. Look at what they're doing to the people of Hong Kong. For the people of Hong Kong to say, hey, I want freedom, they threw them all in jail forever. You haven't heard about those people. Over 48 of their elected officials who were trying to get more democracy were all thrown in jail, and no one's heard about them. American media doesn't talk about it, but the rest of the world does, and I read all the media. So Mike just called out most of the, yeah, I'm calling out the swamp. I am calling out the swamp. I am asking them to make an efficient, realistic answer, to seriously stop regurgitating. They're just regurgitating the same answer. This isn't Hollywood. We don't need a remake of the last gun control bill. We don't need a revisioning of the last gun control bill. That last bill didn't work. If it was so good, we wouldn't need a new one. As an example, if the New York SAFE Act was so great, and if Cuomo was so smart when he put that in, we wouldn't need the red flag law to come out 7 years later. We wouldn't need more gun control. If that was the answer, it would have fixed it already and we'd be done. Instead, we are revisioning those laws. Therefore, the first answer was the wrong answer. A new version of the wrong answer is still going to get you the wrong result. Let's not put our energy in that. Let's not put our energy into being afraid like the news media is pushing down our throats as they selectively pick stories to tell us about so that we would be terrified to the grocery store. No, how about we actually get a real solid answer? Because the answer they're giving us isn't the effective one. Christina says that it makes perfect sense. I hope the people over at DLive are enjoying this. I hope they are paying attention because they're with us and we're actually up and live on DLive as well as on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. I don't know, folks. You know, we're going to stay about 15 more minutes to about 1:30 to have this conversation. Because if we are not being honest, if we are not using honest and real data, if we are not reporting what is truly happening in America, if we are not truly evaluating the reality as it exists right this moment, we will never answer the problem of mass shootings or school shootings or gun crime in general. We will never get that answer right if the only thing we get is just give more power to the government. They'll fix it. That's what they said. You know what? The government told us, I know it's not quite the same thing, but the government told us, don't worry, just give us 15 days. And then you won't have to worry about the big C. And you'll be fine. And you'll go back to normal. Well, that's more than a year ago. And it's not fixed. It's not fine. We're not more free. And it's still a problem. We were told by many of the politicians who are saying right now, go get a vaccine, were the very same people 4 months ago that were saying, don't get the vaccine. The very same people who said 6 months ago, 9 months ago, don't wear a mask, are the very same people who are telling you that you need 2 or 3 masks now. If you're working off of the wrong answers, you get the wrong results. Let me ask you, when was the last time you heard a politician who said anything besides the gun is the problem, people owning guns is a problem? The answer is, let's take away your right to own a gun. When was the last time you heard them say any other answer besides? When was the last time you saw the news media tell you anything but the fact that guns are scary and you shouldn't own a gun? When was the last time you heard that? When have they offered you anything else? And if the government can't think of anything else, either we have people who shouldn't be in office anymore because they can't think out the box. They can't think. They don't have enough of an imagination, or they don't have enough information, and therefore they're ineffective at their jobs. Get them out. Hello, term limits. Or they have an agenda. And that agenda provides them money and power, and that's why they're promoting it. Again, neither one of those are effective for you and me. We need a better answer. Christina mentions help fix U.S., especially before we fix them. What about our veterans and everyone else? Well, again, veterans, why shouldn't they have a firearm? I know that one of the answers from Parkland, Florida, for protecting our schools is to provide veterans, to provide them as security, to arm them and to have them in patrol on our school campuses to help make sure that if someone tried to do a school shooting, that they can be stopped within that first 2 minutes, the most critical time where most people are injured. So, yeah, our veterans can be part of the answer. You know what's not part of the answer? I'll give you another example. New York State is trying to tell people that you can't own a piece of body armor, you know, a bulletproof vest. They want to make it illegal for everyone to own that, which is something that will protect your life. Why can't you have that? Why should that be illegal? Why are they trying to make that a crime in New York State? Again, we have bad leadership that either doesn't have enough information to understand that a bulletproof vest only protects people. It has no offensive capabilities. If they don't understand that, then that's because they're either not well informed and therefore they shouldn't be elected in office, or they are misinformed, which means they're not effective and should not be in office, or they have an agenda which is not an agenda to protect the public and therefore should not be in elected office. And it seems like I got dropped again. They dropped me again. God, the answer of social media is to just try and cancel my voice, it seems. Seriously, all you had to do is wait until 1:30 and I'm going to be done. But instead, they don't want you to have this conversation, apparently. And again, I just upgraded all of my equipment. It's not my equipment that's preventing you from being able to hear this. This is coming from social media. This is people who don't want you to have a voice in a conversation. And I'm not telling you to agree with me, but I am trying to give you the information so that you can make a logical, reasoned discussion. And if I've missed something, I want to hear the answer that I missed. Not an emotional, oh, you just are evil. That's not an answer. That's not going to make anyone safer. Shutting down my voice, as social media is doing right now, isn't making you safer. It's not effective for the American people to shut down people's voice when they say regurgitating the same old answers is not helping anyone. I don't know. Maybe I'm just wrong. I mean, obviously, Facebook and Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey seem to think so. Google seems to think so. I don't know. I don't know, folks. You know, please share this with other people. Please ask people to listen to this and to literally, I'm asking people for an answer, an effective answer, not the same answer we keep getting for the last 5 decades, a real answer. Let's try for that. Let's share this. And if you agree with some of the things I've said so far, please like it, please share it, please subscribe so that more people can see this and more people can say, hey, I have an effective answer. No one's going to get that if no one asks, hey, do you have a better answer than the same thing we've been doing for the last 5 decades that hasn't worked once? It hasn't ever worked. How about something better? If you don't ask people for that, you're never going to get that, which is why we still don't have an answer to the problem. Christina mentions, wow, the resistance you get. I know, I'm getting all kinds of resistance right now. They are kicking me off because they don't want you to have this conversation. They really don't want you to be able to hear this. Somebody is benefiting for not having this conversation. Someone is benefiting when they silence someone for simply saying, what you've done so far is not effective. Do something effective. Which has been the sum of everything we've been talking about today. What's the status of firearms, gun control, and legislation and mass shootings today? Our government is focused on making you afraid and giving you an ineffective answer to the problem because it makes them powerful and it gives them money. And the companies that also make money off of that, they don't want you to have that. They don't want you to consider that. Maybe you think I'm going to hear a thing. If you live, hopefully you'll be able to see it live, or excuse me, see BitChute, YouTube, so that you'll be able to see it in full, and hopefully without the gaps of shutdowns that the internet overlords have done. And maybe someone will get the right answer. I know it's not Sheila Jackson Lee. I know it's not Marco Rubio. Maybe someone else has it. But folks, I will talk with you very soon. I hope everyone will be well. I wish everyone safety. For those who have lost someone in Atlanta or in Colorado and in Boulder, I give you our greatest and deepest sympathies. I am sorry for your loss. I'm sorry you've had to go through this. I'm sorry our government